Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Want to go ahead and give a brief intro of these panelists who are also my friends and part of our executive committee for the President's Council. We've got Jerry Fernandez, who's the president of Tropical Mechanical Contractors. So Jerry's going to give us the point of view of a contractor who's got crews out working on buildings for GCs all over South Florida. We've got AJ Meyer, Vice President of Business Development for A&F Group. So he's going to talk more about the kind of transactional nature of real estate. And then we've got, of course, our distinguished former chair and wonderful leader, Melissa Tapanes-Yawis, who's a named partner at Burkow, Riddell, Fernandez, Larkin, and Tapanes. So welcome, Melissa. And she's going to talk to you more about the zoning side of the business. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to them now and let each one of them kind of cover a little bit more about their backgrounds and also kind of what they're seeing. And then we'll get into some specific questions. All right. So Jerry, I turn it over to you, sir.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Peter, thanks for kicking it off. Well, I just kind of wanted to, thank everybody for joining and taking the time with us today to go over what we're seeing in the construction industry. As you guys know, it's been, crazy 6 to 8 weeks, and in the construction business, it's certainly no challenge, no different. Melissa will get into kind of where we are now as far as outlook, but certainly the construction business, the original shift, the first few weeks was just trying to stay open, making sure that we weren't shut down and having the government see us as an official business or as an essential business to be able to move forward. And the shift is we've gotten through that. We're sort of in the phase now where we got everybody working safely and able to move forward. And now we're in that second phase of where we're used to that. Okay, well, what are we seeing as far as upcoming projects? What's going on with the industry in terms of how much work is out there, keeping people safe, but also, what's on the horizon with active projects and people's backlogs and everything like that. What we're seeing a lot of is just generally delays. Now, if it's a delay versus a cancellation, kind of usually delays turn into cancellations or jobs being killed or postponed indefinitely. But we're seeing a mix of that. We're seeing jobs cancel for funding reasons, jobs being delayed indefinitely, and it's sort of a mix of all that. It could be from jobs that maybe were shovel ready, but maybe pending some financing. The financing has slowed down significantly. And also we see developers sort of generally, just like everybody else in the economy, just generally anxious and nervous. And so they take their time to make that final decision to move forward. So we're seeing a lot of that effect in the market. Also, a lot of us are working, which is a big industry down here in South Florida in the healthcare field. So the healthcare field has always been sort of immune to economic perturbations. And we always felt that, people are always going to be having to go to the hospital. But, what we're seeing now is, which is the only thing that could have happened to affect the healthcare business, was people not going to the hospital. Hospitals are empty. The fact that they've postponed or, stopped elective surgeries, which looks like they're going to ramp up over the next couple of weeks. The elective surgeries is a big revenue generator for a lot of these healthcare systems. And so that has caused a sharp decrease in revenue and put a lot of projects in the healthcare business on hold. We're seeing that effect. We're seeing jobs, a lot of it's canceled, a postponement of a year, that kind of thing. And then generally that affects the general market, affects the people moving forward with projects too. So that's what we're seeing a lot as far as upcoming projects. People are nervous. Discounters developers looking for discounts. We're seeing too. Well, they say, the market's gonna, our pro forma was kind of tight. If we get 10% off of every supplier on the site, maybe we can make this project work. We're seeing a lot of that. People waiting to see what happens to make those decisions. As far as on active sites, like I said, a few weeks back, people were very, very just anxious to make sure we're moving forward and keeping things going. That danger is no longer in effect, but how do we keep guys working safely? We're sort of used to on construction sites being accountable for everybody's safety. You know, PPE is not a new term for us. PPE is, hard hats, gloves, eye protection, um, safety vests, work boots. That's something that we've always had to make sure we're taking care of our guys for a long time. So we just added another level to it in terms of not only the masks, but also the distancing. So we've added, for example, guys on high rises, usually you should jam into buck hoist to get up there. Now they got to go, it's just slower. Thin out the people. If there's a lot of work to be done in one room, they kind of work in shifts to mitigate the amount of people working in one room. But the construction industry has adapted to that fairly quickly. So the guys at the beginning, and even the field construction workers in the beginning, had a very high degree of nervousness about being out there working. A lot of the people have taken steps to mitigate that, and guys are comfortable working out there. You get used to it. The guys know what's up. They know they got to keep working. They know there's uncertainty out there, and we're seeing a lot of guys kind of settle in and do that very well. So that's been working well. But we're seeing a lot of other issues coming up. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of liability. What happens if somebody gets sick on a job site, or you think they got sick on a job site, or they think they got sick on a job site? Because, is there a workers' comp liability there? And a lot of people are working through that. And the answer is, we don't know. So, a lot of those questions are out there, and we're working through it. A lot of things we're seeing also is, which I think is normal for what we're seeing in the market, is delays in material procurement. It's not stopped, but there are delays. A lot of factories are shutting down or had shut down for a period of time. We are seeing that kind of curtail a little bit, but we're seeing some delays in materials arriving on job sites, particularly manufactured materials from different areas. Further delays and stuff that's coming internationally. A lot of mechanical equipment and electrical equipment that's installed in this area gets manufactured in Mexico. And a lot of that is being delayed by a period of 3 to 3 weeks, a month, 6 weeks. May not sound like a lot, but when you're on a tight schedule, it's a big deal. So we're seeing some of that. But again, guys are working through it. The construction industry adapts pretty well to a lot of things. And that's one of the things that's another effect that we're seeing. So generally, I would say that a lot of people remember 2009 and what the effect was on that. A lot of people are sort of retracting to the lessons learned 10 years ago, and whether or not that's parallel or not remains to be seen. But people are sort of reacting to that aggressively and making sure they're in a position to maintain what they have moving forward and survive this, whatever it ends up being in a few weeks. So I don't know, that's kind of our update. It just give you an idea of the kind of things that we're dealing with on a daily basis. I think I'm in the same boat with AJ and a lot of other guys out there. Is we're just trying to make sure we have work, make sure that our jobs are moving forward and we can keep our guys moving. So,
Great.
All
right, Jerry, thanks.
That's my show. Yeah.
We'll have more questions for you later. I guess we can't really blame this on Chinese drywall, although that would be a good,
right.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So, all right. Well, I'm going to pivot now to the zoning side of it. So, Mel, I'm going to call on you next, partner at Burkow, Riddell, Fernandez, Larkin, and Tapinis. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on in your world with virtual things and how you're staying safe and staying busy? So.
Absolutely. Well, hi, Pete, and thanks everyone for putting this together, especially Pete and the FIU President's Council. As Pete mentioned, I'm a land use and zoning attorney, so I'm on the front end of the construction life cycle. We work with landowners, developers, and institutions to secure permits from state and local governments. So you can imagine there's like a labyrinth of regulations, and this is actually a really proud moment in the construction industry. Our organizations from the Builders Association of South Florida, the Latin Builders Association, Associated Builders and Contractors, we've really banded together not only in working with state governments and our local governments to deem construction an essential business, but also implement this pledge that Jerry was referring to earlier, which is compliance with the strictest of CDC guidelines and adding the health-related PPE equipment to the already stringent construction personal protective equipment precautions. So you can imagine that local and state government, where is the the giver of these regulations, they've been very proactive along with the industry. Real estate, including construction, is the largest component of the national GDP. 13% of the national GDP. We have 680,000 businesses and employ over 7 million folks throughout the country. You can imagine that combined with state and local government is 9% of the national GDP. So those two things put together, it makes construction such a really an economic driver that from the federal and the state government, they look to construction to see what the future holds. Just to give an idea, over in the state of Florida, last year in 2019, we added 21,000 jobs in the construction industry here in the state. That really went to the 3.9% unemployment rate, as well as locally in the county, where we were hovering under 2% of unemployment. And that really goes to where we began 2020, which was a very strong beginning to the year. I think that the gains that we saw leaning into 2020 from the Great Recession has really put us in the best position to deal with this pandemic. And I would say that, when we think about real estate, it's all local, and where best to spend a pandemic if it not Miami, right? We have the best of resort style living that you don't need to go to travel very far besides your backyard to have an enviable combination of the natural environment and the man-made environment. So with that said, it's actually a great time to plan for a city's future. So we see that our due diligence and acquisition part of our law firm is moving forward without a hitch. Investments from denser cities nationally and internationally are looking at Miami with a lot of interest because of that natural environment, and we're not as dense except in our urban core than other of these more dense local areas. We also see a renewed interest in medical office, as Jerry mentioned, as well as industrial sites to deal with what we've already seen, all these Amazon and this kind of internet-fueled retail sector, which is taking away from our traditional brick and mortar retail, as well as an actual renewed interest in single family residential. The idea of the suburbs is a nice place where everybody can have their picket fence, their pools in their backyards, etc. Over the last several years, we've seen a push into the more urban environments of multifamily, which is really, we've seen that slow down over the last few years as it's been saturated through entitlements in the past. Speaking of entitlements, this is the time where there is this renewed interest in planning resilient and sustainable cities. It seems to be more important than ever. Local governments are anxious for development to deal with their own budget shortfalls from sales taxes, bed taxes, and canceled events, where local governments do see a lot of their annual budgets coming from. So the impact fees that new development actually pays into the system, those are looked at for infrastructure improvements, which goes to keeping people employed and the labor force of local and state governments busy. Again, such a large percentage of the employment base. So there's no better time to begin these public-private partnerships than now. And so not only is due diligence and acquisition strong at our firm, but so is the entitlements. With that said, we were at a backlog, and that's what Pete mentioned, of these quasi-judicial hearings as local governments, they're not comfortable with Zoom kind of public hearings where everybody has the right to be heard. We're concerned about challenges to entitlements for the controversial projects, but in many local governments, they're already taking the non-controversial projects first. And we're also seeing a lot of movements in non-quasi-judicial work, which is like the legislative code amendments, settling lawsuits that have been in the pipeline for some time, where local governments just want to be done with that kind of liability opening and just closing those issues, which lead us to like the construction. And I think AJ is the best person to talk about construction from what I see, because of the solid footing that we've been on leading up to this point. The biggest complaint that many contractors had was a very tight labor force, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, and they're hoping to get better pricing and to have the opportunities to create real tangible assets. So projects that already have the funding from the equity markets, those are moving forward. What we're seeing is a lag for folks who don't have that kind of funding and are dependent on more of the traditional financing sources, where our local and national banks and regional banks are inundated with PPP funds and those kinds of loan processing. So there's not that kind of accessibility to capital that there once was. So I'm interested in seeing what AJ has to say about new projects and getting those permits, because local government, we're having weekly meetings with all of our county and city staff members, and they want to hear from contractors through our organizations. So I'm interested what AJ's seen on sites.
Great. That's a great segue. So, and I think Mel, so Jerry talked about the fact that he's kind of on the back end and that he's got the teams that are on construction sites. You're obviously closer to the front end. So now we're going to turn it over to AJ, Vice President of Business Development for A&F Group. So AJ, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your organization and your role, and then kind of fill us in on what you're seeing in your world.
Sure. Well, thank you, Pete, and my apologies, and I'll apologize for you for inviting me onto this panel. Actually, I don't know why you would do such a thing, but
well, you fixed your background. I appreciate that. So
anytime. No, thank you for the opportunity. So I run business development and business growth for A&F Group. We're a mid-sized family-owned construction company in South Florida. We only do work in South Florida, but I have the ability to speak a little bit to kind of some other geographies and regions throughout the state if anyone's so inclined to talk about those. But specific to South Florida and what we have going on. So I'll make it pretty concise and pretty quick in a sense. You heard Melissa and Jerry both talk about pricing. So it's fun because developers are being squeezed. As you heard Jerry say, they're always worried about their bottom line and their performance being tight. So now, especially seeing gas, which is a very tangible commodity that we see price being significantly reduced on, developers, many of them, not the very educated ones, but many of them say, oh, so construction costs are coming down, material costs are coming down. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case. We are seeing a slight reduction in costs, material and supply costs on some of the larger projects, especially some of the high-rise projects. But on the smaller mid-market projects, we're not seeing much of a difference in pricing. We probably could see something in the next 6 months or so, and Jerry alluded to specifically on the productivity and the manufacturing side and some material delays, but not seeing a major challenge right now with pricing. The developers are, not the contractors. But what's interesting to mention, just looking at it from a 30,000 foot perspective, is I got a call last week from a smaller contractor and owner's rep firm who called me really to pick my brain to see what opportunities are out there. He is struggling. He got the PPP money, able to stay afloat for about 3 to 4 weeks. But he's going to get to a point where he's going to need to make drastic decisions right now because he's not seeing product going out to the market in his wheelhouse. Again, probably the $5 to $10 million product range. Additionally, on the owner's rep side, he is unable to get new work. A handful of projects that he has that he was working on decided either not to go for permit or just decided to put the brakes. And I'll add one more element to that. For A&F, we've had 3 projects that put the brakes on. That's 3 projects out of 2 dozen. So it's not something that is catastrophic. It's definitely something that people are starting to get a little weary of, maybe on the development side. But like Melissa said, specifically those folks that don't have their equity tied up, those are the major projects or clients that we're working with that are experiencing those types of delays. And those delays are just for 60, 90, maybe 120 days. They already are in for permit or in the process for approvals. So again, it's just a short delay. And I think it's to really combat everything else that they're experiencing. I'll tell you, from a worker standpoint, Melissa, I couldn't agree with you more. There's going to be a great talent on the market for contractors like us to pick up. Maybe not the A+ talent, but definitely the B+ talent that we've been trying to capture for many, many years. That's salaries typically are overinflated at this point. You have folks with 5 years of experience asking for 6 figures and getting it in with some companies, but you have some of the major contractors in the marketplace that have had significant layoffs and furloughs. So for a mid-sized family-owned firm like ours, it creates a great opportunity. In fact, just last week, our owner and president sent out a memo to everyone with the subject line, A&F and the coronavirus challenges of 2020. Many of you would think, what's this email going to be about? It informed us of everything going on, but more importantly, our ownership decided to give everyone a 3% raise across the board. So I think that speaks to this issue or challenge that we're going through is specific to the industry of construction, because while you see some firms laying off, you see others hiring and providing salary increases to employees. And I think that speaks to the organization in general. It's extremely important to be diversified in growth, especially that we've seen in the last few years, to have strategic growth in multiple market sectors and not be over leveraged. And then I'll just briefly add, Peter, and for the folks on the call, on the investment side. So what's interesting is one of my good friends, he owns a couple 100,000 square feet of retail throughout the state. And over the last 20 to 30 days, he's received probably a dozen or so calls to buy over leveraged assets, tremendous assets, but over leveraged, by folks, developers, owners that you would know their names just by their last name or the company, that you'd be surprised that they're trying to get rid of this asset. So I think what you're going to see is maybe a slowdown over the next, I'd say 6 to 10 months. Melissa could speak more to that, but just from what I see, I could see a little slowdown in new project starts. But I think you're still going to have in 2021, so 12 months from now, I think you're going to have a solid rebound, because some of these assets that are being sold that were over leveraged, they're going to be recapitalized and redeveloped. I think you'll see on the commercial side and retail and restaurant side, yes, it's unfortunate. Businesses are unfortunately having to close, but that's going to create the opportunity for reinvestment and rebirth, reevaluating spaces that are now out of business into the new generation and what we're looking at designing from an integrated standpoint. So I'm still very optimistic. Lastly, on the public side, I think you're going to see a significant reinvestment in public infrastructure. So whether that be water and sewer, roads, bridges, et cetera, but more importantly on the vertical side. that's kind of where we're moving our business to start to capitalize on the public infrastructure standpoint.
Gotcha. Well, I think we got a great kind of coverage from all three of you. Before we get into the questions, I want to acknowledge a couple folks have joined us, and acknowledge some friends too. So the lady with the baseball, the FIU baseball hat, Sandy Gonzalez Levy, SVP of External Relations. So I want to shout out to Sandy. Most of you know her. Kevin Coughlin, who is the VP of Enrollment Services. So Kevin's out there. I see you. Kevin's waving. JC Espinosa, Dean of the Honors College. So JC, welcome. And then my fellow Greek, John Valakis, Dean of the College of Engineering and Computing. Yasu Yanni, it's good to see you. Okay. And so that's it for our esteemed guests. Then we have the kind of not so esteemed guests. No, just kidding. So Myrna, I wanted to shout out to you, my friend Myrna Sonora. Why don't you unmute and tell everybody about your organization, and maybe just give us like 30 seconds on kind of what you're seeing.
Absolutely. Thank you. We are a small nonprofit across the state of Florida that helps small businesses either sustain, start, or in this instance, protect capital and sort of prepare how to repivot. So we do general business development consulting. You know, I'm glad to see that what we're hearing is so much on point with what I've heard both Mel and Jerry mention with regards to some of the concerns. You know, small businesses that we see are kind of in that wait and see pattern. They're concerned about taking risks right now, but they're equally concerned about missing opportunities. So it's that daily balance of, you know, what am I going to do today and what's that going to look like, you know, as soon as tomorrow. There's a lot of trying to come up with best practices for safety. And Jerry, thank you for posting what you guys are doing, because you know, it's just something else in the arsenal, because that in itself is all over the place. I think some people are doing more, some people are doing a lot less. And it's going to be interesting for me to see if there's ever going to be like a general guideline that we can pass down to the smaller businesses that would welcome that expertise. So a lot of the same concerns, both on what the economy is going to look like and also what the new normal is going to be.
Gotcha. Great, Myrna. I want to cover my friend Sergio Abreu down in the corner. Sergio, I don't know that you can just give us kind of 30 seconds on what you're doing at TICO and kind of maybe what you're seeing at the state level as part of your role.
Thanks, Pete. Really at the state level, all the activity that's happening is around reopening the rest of the state. As you all know, today is the day that the governor's opening up the rest of the state, with the exception of Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. And so we're not seeing a mad rush back to the offices and to retail and all that, but you are seeing a lot more activity than we had been seeing up to this point. And I think slowly but surely, you know, mostly due to a lot of the anxiety out there, a lot of the folks, you know, pushing in the direction of trying to get Florida back opened again. We're going to be seeing a lot of that activity this week and into next week. A lot more businesses opening, a lot of more people getting back into the swing of things, if you will. And there's a lot more where that came from. I mean, there's still a lot of businesses that are not authorized to open. And so we're going to see a lot more of that activity, especially in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. I think we're going to anxiously await that activity as well, but we need to be careful so that we don't, you know, fall back into the same old habits, and try to reopen sooner than some of those businesses are prepared for, and sooner than we need to from a, you know, from a COVID standpoint and from a health standpoint. I've sat in on a lot of activity. As you know, the utility industry hits every aspect of industry, because we energize small businesses, we energize hotels, we provide energy to every industry, and so You could see sort of the business activity on the back end. We're sort of the lagging indicator of business activity coming on board. And so we've seen we're a critical infrastructure business. So our crews have been out there maintaining the system and doing a lot of the same things that the construction industry has been doing. We've been trying to work with them closely as well, because all of that activity is very interrelated. So from our perspective, I think it's making sure that that we time this correctly and that we don't have a backlash or a going back too soon and then having to reclose our doors and push people back. I think you're going to see people in general be a lot more careful. We're seeing that as we're out roaming the streets. Our crews are out there and watching people, go back to work. And I've had a couple of conference calls here this morning talking about some of that activity out in the fields. And so hopefully we can manage it and that we keep the folks that are going back to business following the rules and making sure that we're keeping the social distance, we're keeping our masks on, we're doing the things that we need to do so that we can continue the progress toward reopening Florida. Gotcha.
Okay, that's a great update and kind of insights from Tallahassee, as well as from your side of the business. I want to cover a couple questions that came through while you guys were giving your intros and kind of points of view. Kind of a combination of two questions. Someone had asked Jerry, what are you doing to test and trace your folks? And then Kevin, I think more specifically said, are you doing any testing or tracing? Do you have a plan for someone who wants to work while he or she has a dry fever or cough or or I guess other symptoms? And then Jerry, although you can certainly cover this, mentioned you are actually responded on here saying that you are, let me see if I can find this here. You're keeping them, we do temperature checks on all employees daily, or if someone feels sick, they stay at home at full pay for 14 days. So I thought that was great. You want to add any comments to that, Jerry?
Yeah, so what we did was, and this is kind of, like I said, one of those things that in the beginning, we kind of just had to react to it. So the job sites were, okay, how do we check people coming into the job site? Because we're not the only ones on the job site. Everybody else wanted to make sure they were being careful too. So certain job sites were implementing that temperature checks. We do the temperature checks with a infrared thermometer, so nobody has to touch anybody, right? Infrared thermometer, they do it on everybody's forehead. We had the foreman sign off. And so a couple of larger jobs doing that, so we just said, let's do it on all our sites, regardless of whether or not they're requiring us to do it. So every employee, even in our warehouse here, has to do that. As far as the if they're feeling sick, in the beginning, there was a lot of hesitation. People weren't sure how to react. But we just made the decision, look, if you're sick, you get 14 days. That's it, okay? The guys were coming back. That happened to 2-3 guys. They came back earlier. They said, look, we were sick, but once you're clear for like 5 days, they were able to get tested. They were sure they were clear. They came back. Because in the beginning, the testing was very, as you know, was very hit or miss. We are actually trying to get a group, get a company together to actually test all of our employees for the IgG and the IgA, which is basically the antigen and the active COVID test, to see if we can clear guys. Maybe guys have had it. That's another thing we're doing. So anyway, that's just some of the things you're dealing with. The other thing we had a job site where one of our subcontractors showed up on a job site, didn't feel sick, but he did a test because his sister, who he was caring for, was positive. Turns out the guy was on a site, and then that night turned out he had been positive. He was COVID positive. So what do you do? So they end up clearing the whole job site, taking 48 hours, close the job site, have it sanitized and worked, and everybody went back to work 2 days later. So people are kind of reacting to that in different ways. But thankfully, I think that most of the field guys and they've been given the directive. If you see somebody you don't know, you have to assume that they have it. That's why everybody's got to be covered. So we're reacting to that, and we're able to move forward. So everybody's working. So we're good.
Great.
Pete, this is Sandy. I
Yeah.
have a follow-up question for Jerry. So Jerry, we're in the process, the university is in the process of repopulating our campuses, and we have a task force that has been created that it's looking to see how we do that. And we have been discussing what needs to be done, testing, for instance, and also checking the temperature. Like, for instance, when is it that you actually check the temperature? Our scientists and our experts here, healthcare industry experts, have told us that the best time really to take your temperature is when you wake up in the morning to see how it is that your temperature is. Because if you take your temperature coming into work and you came out of a car that has air conditioning, your temperature is not going to be the same, or is not really going to predict the exact temperature that you would have. Or for that matter, if you have been on the job outside in the heat, your temperature also is going to be off. So that's one. And then the other thing that we are doing is we have put together a questionnaire for in an app that will be actually sent to all of the employees, and I would imagine that eventually to students when we do get into that phase. But it's a 3-question document app that would basically have them answer those 3 questions even before they get to campus. Because one of the last things that you probably want is to have somebody that is already infected to come into campus and then have to send them home. So I was wondering if you have, because obviously you've been on the job and you are way into phase 1, which we're not. Even though we do have some students and we do have some faculty and staff that are still coming into our campuses. So my question to you is, have you seen, based on what you're doing, have you seen that you have had to send a lot of folks home once they get there? And has there been any tracing from that, moving forward?
So yeah, no, I mean, the reality is that you're right. Our system certainly isn't perfect. We didn't invent it. We're kind of copied it from other, it just kind of evolved. It's not perfect. It's just the system that we have. Originally, there was a 3-question questionnaire. It was are you feeling sick? There was a temperature, and are you feeling sick or coughing? Was one question. The second question was, have you been outside of the country in the last 14 days? Which now it seems almost quaint. All right.
Yeah.
And then the third question is, have you been caring for somebody or lived with somebody that has been tested positive? Okay. So those 3 questions are asked in that questionnaire every single morning to every single employee. The reality is that everybody knows. I think that people just don't go if they feel a temperature. We haven't had any issues with turning people around. Okay. If you ask me, I think what the construction industry is doing, is more of a liability shield. Okay. It's not a perfect system. It is something to protect, protect the liability of the construction site itself. But it's not a perfect system. As we all know, there's asymptomatic people and all that kind of thing. So this is just what the construction is. Just it is what it is. Okay. It's the system that we have. Ideally, there will be something, to your point, that can be tracked a little better. But it's just the thing you can come up with about testing. Imagine, thousands of, our job sites with 1,000 people, every single morning. And then you have the issue, well, people were lining up in the morning. And then the line was more dangerous than,
Yeah.
The line of people said it was more dangerous than anything else. So then we had each individual group of smaller guys, of subcontractors, they would self-test and then report. So we kind of evolved into that. And the guys are used to it. But to your point, Sandy, I don't know. I don't know how accurate it is. I'm not a medical expert. It's just it is the best system that we can come up with. Okay. You know, we've tried to purchase, just as Tropic Mechanical tried to purchase bulk testing, you know, for our employees, so we could do multiple tests and make sure our employees are healthy and all that. And it's impossible. We've been spending our time getting PPE and getting the guys protected in that respect. One of the funny things is the construction industry is actually, you know, it used to be that, okay, everybody would buy the masks. Now they're using the masks so often. Imagine a construction site, a mask, how dirty it gets. You might be able to use yours for a few days. So we're spending, you know, $5 a day on a mask. So we ended up across the board, everybody has logoed masks of their employees' logo, you know, the company logo. They give it to other employees, 10 masks, and they wash them like a shirt, you know, and it just becomes part of their daily routine. So we're buying hundreds of those, giving them to all the employees, and they keep them, as you only buy them once as opposed to having to throw them away. Just another thing we're adjusting to. Again, not perfect. It's what we have. We're trying to do the best practice that we know how to do, and that's what we're trying to do.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. So I've got a question for Melissa from our friend and former chair, Victor Balestra. Victor asked, have you heard of any concerns about how the switch to working from home will affect the demand for office space, as companies discover that many people can indeed work from home permanently, and therefore large office spaces might become less necessary? So Mel? Good question,
Yes.
Victor, by the way. Good question.
Very good question, and actually a question that my law firm has been struggling with as we have a planned expansion in our own building. So we've been listening to our clients saying that there has been a reduction in demand for not only planned expansions and just new businesses with this switch to WeWork and those kinds of communal office spaces. So part of it is, I think, just the natural evolution of office spaces, similar to what we're seeing in the retail market. But I can tell you personally, my law firm is moving forward with our expansion. We like to have our office space, and the difference between, you know, our home lives and our professional lives. So what we've seen is that there's really no alternative to just the collegialism of working collaboratively physically in a team. So I think, like us, many teams and professional environments will continue to want to have physical offices, just to have that kind of separation from your home life. There's, as we've all seen, dealing with this pandemic, there's something to be said about routine, and just that routine of getting dressed, going to the office, seeing people on a regular basis. The things that many of us have taken for granted for many years now seem to be, you know, something very special. So I've heard of folks, oh, we're not moving forward with that expansion, but I would think that I think I tend to agree with AJ that I think it's just a matter of delay, of timing, as we all kind of just deal with changes versus something permanent. I think that, you know, humans were a social bunch, and I think we just miss working collaboratively in teams. And, you know, these Zoom features and technology are wonderful, but I think long term, there's nothing like meeting in person and solving problems together in that kind of traditional way.
Thank you, Maggie.
Gotcha.
I like your optimism.
Great. We've got a few more minutes left. AJ, do you want to comment at all on some of the points that Jerry was commenting on from your point of view?
Yeah, sure. Real quick though, on looking at productivity. So Jerry mentioned earlier, not in his reply just now, but in terms of, he used the example of a buck hoist going up a 40-story tower, let's say, and you could pack in 10 guys in a buck hoist, and now you can do 2. What we're going to be challenged with, both from a contractual standpoint, but a CYA standpoint, is productivity. You know, when we sign contracts, we commit to certain dates. And I think you're going to see not necessarily Melissa herself, but maybe some of her colleagues in her office that do construction law and others out there, they're going to be very busy because of this lack of productivity and how that's going to affect the cost parameters on a project at the end of the day, and how much is actually reimbursable versus not reimbursable to the contractor and to the subcontractors. But I can tell you, we immediately, when Mayor Jimenez came out with that order in Dade regarding what needs to be done on the project site from a PPP standpoint, following CDC recommendations, hand washing stations, et cetera, within 24 hours, we had on 2 of our project sites in Dade, we had a police officer show up and do an inspection to ensure that we were following all protocol and all procedures. And so it is definitely happening. And I think that's a good thing to know. And it's comforting for those that aren't in the industry to actually know that, you know, what our politicians are saying are actually happening at the granular level. So precautions are being taken. But at the end of the day, we got to think about who are the construction laborers on site. You know, take a moment and think about who those individuals are and their desire for income or need for that income. And so if those folks are getting their temperatures taken or are feeling that they're having a fever, are they going to decide to stay at home to ensure their own safety and the workers' safety, or to ensure their paycheck? And so for us as the general contractors, we need to really take that into consideration in terms of the safety on site. So now we're having subcontractor meetings, which we're all together in a conference room, and we're having calls like this with our subcontractors to do coordination. It's extremely challenging. And again, it goes back to that productivity challenge. And I don't know what the result of that's what it's gonna become, but there's going to be some negative side effects to that loss of productivity there.
Gotcha. I guess that also begs the question, and I actually heard a panel on NPR a few weeks ago talking about this very issue, and the fact that many individual workers are not going to, if it's a matter of not getting paid or and not eating or going in with a potential fever or cough, they may end up doing that. So I think the fact that what Jerry's doing around, guaranteeing the 14 days is critical. But also, I guess the question is for you, and maybe even Myrna can chime in on this, are subcontractors filing for, PPP, and, are they in fact getting relief, to make sure they can keep their employees paid while they're working on these projects?
Ah, yes, the infamous PPP. So it's better the second round is all I can say. Better, but far from perfect. I think it really was the luck of the draw. If you happen to bank with a big bank, you were not part of the first to roll out. There's a lot of confusion around whether or not you should also attempt to reapply and whether there'll be any backlash. The best that we can determine and what we've been able to tell our clients from what we're hearing from the SBA and others is, just make sure, go ahead and apply with another bank after you've done all your due diligence to see what the status of your application is if you haven't heard, but make sure that you withdraw the application from the second bank as soon as you know if you've been approved by whichever bank, just to make sure that there's no duplication. And that concerns us because with our clients, that whole challenge of that bureaucracy is intimidating. So we're keeping a close eye on that. I mean, I just heard from the Florida Bankers Association this morning that there's still about $100 million out there in PPP for new applications. That's not a lot, but it's something. My original thought, based on what I was hearing, was that a lot of the new assignment of PPP took into account what was on queue, just that and not more than that. It seems that perhaps is not the case anymore. So, it's almost, in terms of the smaller businesses, the subcontractors, it's almost a lotto. you know, you go in there, you give it your best shot, and you figure out what comes next based on whether you get approved and how much you're approved for. It's been, you know, none of you are surprised if I tell you that a lot of these businesses are in business by the grace of God in terms of their control of their own finances. They're not really sure, you know, what their payroll is. They're not. So that's been a real challenge for us, and an area where we've been able to move the needle, which I'm very proud of. But a lot of the things that we take for granted, for maybe a company that Jerry subcontracts, is a big deal and a brand new thing. And you know, we're trying to make sure that the little guy is able to be employed by being and able to get some of the aid. But it's, you know, it's been difficult, and it's not only the fault of the way the program was rolled out, it's also the lack of ability to really manage in that fashion that a lot of these small businesses have.
Gotcha. AJ, you want to add anything more to that, or?
By the grace of God.
I would say, yeah, I would say that
Sure.
what I've seen is the people that need it the least, the larger companies, the larger subcontractors that have their, you know, their finances in order and have very good relationships with the banks, are the ones that got put to the front of the line. And then the smaller guys that are, you know, maybe have half a dozen employees or 15 employees that, you know, their wife does the invoicing on the weekends, and they, you know, that need the help the most, have been struggling. We've actually helped 2 of our subcontractors, tiered subcontractors, get it through our bank because they couldn't get it. And it was the guys that need it the most. And that's I'm sure what you're seeing is the guys that have their finances in order are the ones that are getting it, and they probably need it the least, to be honest with you.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
May I add
Yeah.
a comment, Pete? May I add a comment to this discussion?
Sure.
Something that has come to my attention, and perhaps something that the small businesses could be aware of and sort of bring it forward. My understanding is that the small businesses might have been kind of short-circuited by the fact that many of the hotel chains, the big hotel chains, they look big, but in reality, every hotel is individual, and every hotel is run by a small organization, which means they can apply, although they are Marriott, they are, you know, Hilton and so on, they can apply for, you know, funding under the small business process. And that means that a significant amount, an unexpected amount, has gone to these kinds of what I call franchise organizations that are under a big umbrella, but really they're applying under their own store. Is there something that this true small businesses can say, hey, this is not really working for us because although it's a small businesses, in reality, it's a small business under a big umbrella. So that has been the challenge that seems to be coming forward. Well, maybe you know, Ms. Sonora, maybe you can comment on that. You know.
Oh, you're on mute, Myrna. Myrna, you're on mute.
Yeah,
there you go.
You know, there's one side to that argument, and believe me, I am on the side of the little guy. Those are my constituents. That's who I represent. But, you know, it's a wheel. And a lot of these hotels employ people, you know, in numbers that are significant enough to call the attention of elected officials. So, you know, I think that it's a good opportunity to have conversations. Those of you that are helping your subs with your own banks, for example, about diversifying. You know, don't have one banking relationship, have at least 2. Have one of them be a community bank where there's a person that you know and for whom you are a more significant client. But I have to tell you, Mr. Velázquez, it's a mess. It's a mess, and it's going to be a mess for a while before it all shakes out and we really see what the sort of mid and long-term impact is going to be for the small businesses, and not small businesses you know, that have, I'm talking about small businesses with 20 employees or less. You know, those guys, which are such a definitive motor of our local economy, especially in the city of Miami, Hialeah, ni se diga, not even, you know, even more so. Yet I don't know when those guys are going to be able to come back and in what shape that comeback will be.
Yeah, I would add to that, Myrna, that my experience from having my wife work for a small business and I have a friend, John, who owns, you know, 100 Papa John's restaurants, and it just built a hotel in Orlando that he couldn't even open, right? That's the Hilton property, and owns all the Twin Peaks in South Florida, and had to let go of 800, 900 people, you know, servers. He's a small business. I mean, he's got, you know, he filed for different loans. But what I also tell you, having friends at community banks and at Wells and at other banks, they're not created equal in terms of their capacity to do this, how they chose who they did it for. I've seen banks where they literally did it by lottery, where just a random pool of customers would pop up, and then they would file for that one and the next one and the next one, and then others that chose to do it for their top customers and then anyone else that came to them. So it is kind of there was no consistency to how it was handled. I know another friend of mine who filed with B of A, didn't get it through, to your point, Myrna, went to Bank Leumi, the Israeli bank, and didn't even have a relationship. They filed, and they got the loan within 24 hours. So
the landscape is littered with those kinds of stories, and there's no rhyme or reason. So it's difficult to formulate an answer of you know, what, other than, you know, diversification is good for everything. Diversify your banking relationships, diversify your comments, you know, go into the bank. I know that this, to Melissa's point, this whole virtual thing is cool and everything, but sometimes you just have to go into the bank and shake a hand. Well, not shake a hand. Whatever you can do these days. But
All right. Well, thank you, Myrna. On that, I'm gonna end our session. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our President's Council participants.